Before I do start this video, make sure to use my TCG player affiliate down below if you're looking for any of these singles that I talk about today. Also, this channel is sponsored by Arcane Fortress. If you're looking for the best deck boxes around, make sure to use my link down below in the description to check them out. One other way you can support the channel is by becoming a patron. There are some great benefits of being a patron to the channel, such as giveaways, deck advice, and more when you do join. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on PubStomp MTG, and in this video today, I'm going to do a deck tech around Grist, Voracious, Larva. And the main reason why I wanted to do a deck tech around this specific commander is it's actually pretty powerful. I actually played against it a couple days ago and played against it multiple times, and it does some serious work. And I also wanted to make a deck tech at least around one of the flip planeswalkers, and Grist is the perfect one. I was thinking about doing Sorin. If you do want to see Sorin, make sure to comment down below if you want to see it. But let's read what Grist does. So for 1 green mana, legendary creature insect with a 1/2 body with death touch. Whenever Grist or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it entered from your graveyard or if you cast it from your graveyard, you may pay a green mana. If you do, exile Grist, then return to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control. So when you flip it, it will change into Grist the Plague Swarm. So this has 3 starting loyalty. It does have a +1, create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token. Then mill 2 cards, put a death touch counter on 1 token if it's a black card milled this way. It does have a -2 ability to destroy target artifact or enchantment. And it has a -6 ability for each creature card in your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 1/1 black and green insect. So this one is pretty sweet. I love the art alone. Grist is one of fan favorites. A lot of people do like it, and having just a 1 mana commander is pretty powerful. It's a great engine. You can just flip right into it basically pretty fast if you have a mill strategy going for yourself. So with that said, let's now focus on the deck tech and talk about some cards I would add in here. So now let's discuss the game plan. There's a lot of ways we could put Grist into the graveyard so that we could get it onto the battlefield, flip it into the planeswalker side. There are some ways we could do this pretty fast and pretty efficiently. The first one I did want to highlight is Grist herself, the first version, Grist the Hunger Tide. It does have a starting loyalty of 3, and as long as Grist is not on the battlefield, it's a 1/1 green insect creature token in addition to its other types. It does have a +1 ability to make a 1/1 black and green insect creature token. And then you mill a card. If an insect was milled this way, you put a loyalty counter on Grist and repeat the process. It has a -2 ability. You may sacrifice a creature. When you do, destroy target creature or planeswalker. That's the one we want to focus on the most. It's a very good one because we could sacrifice our commander, put it into the graveyard so that we could reanimate it later on, and also get additional value by destroying target creature or planeswalker. And our -5 can be pretty powerful depending on how much creature cards we do have in our graveyard. Each opponent loses life equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Since we are in a mill strategy, that could be exponentially huge for ourselves. Other cards I do want to highlight is Flare of Cultivation, Dread Return, and Yawgmoth Thran Physician. These are each great mainly because they focus on sacrificing our commanders, so they also get some kind of value. Flare of Cultivation will get us ahead on ramp, especially if we play Grist on turn 1. Dread Return can act as a way we could just put Grist from the graveyard to the battlefield, or we could also sacrifice Grist to put into the graveyard. And we all know Yawgmoth Thran Physician at this point. This is such an engine to draw cards. It acts as removal and it proliferates. We could proliferate our commander more and more so that we could get eventual value. I mean, at least when it's on its planeswalker side, by the way. Another way we could sacrifice our commander is using Rite of the Reliquary. This is an excellent card, mainly because you could tap and sacrifice another creature, search your library for a land card, and put it onto the battlefield tapped. And of course, it can get exponentially huge depending on how much creatures we do have in our graveyard, which I count on having a lot, by the way. However, one of my more personal favorite ones that we could take advantage of is Rise of the Witch King, mainly because I love Lord of the Rings, but this is a great card in the deck. Each player sacrifices a creature. If you sacrifice a creature this way, you may return another permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So since we targeted Grist first, we sacrifice Grist. We also make our opponent sacrifice a creature too, by the way, so it acts as great removal. But then we can return another permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield, so like our Grist that we just sacrificed, and then just pay 1 extra mana off of that to make it into the planeswalker side. Other creatures, though, that could return from the graveyard to the battlefield, though, I did want to highlight is Reassembling Skeleton and Bloodghast. You can just pay 2 mana to return Reassembling Skeleton onto the battlefield, and then we could pay that extra mana to flip Grist. And of course, with Bloodghast, it has that ability whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Bloodghast from your graveyard to the battlefield, so that's perfect. We could just play a land and then have Grist on the battlefield, put Bloodghast onto the battlefield, and then flip Grist by paying 1 green mana. But in all actual reality, this is going to be a graveyard deck. We want to focus on putting a lot of different creatures into the graveyard, ways we could do that is by taking advantage of 6 and old stick fingers. 6 is a pretty good engine. Whenever it does attack, mill 3 cards, you may put a land card from among them into your hand, and of course we do have that retrace ability, so we could just discard a land card and then cast a permanent spell onto the battlefield like a creature to flip Grist. And with old stick figures, depending on how much mana you do pay into that X ability, you could put a huge amount of creatures from your library into the graveyard and make it super powerful too. Also, I wanted to throw in the totally not busted mechanic Dredge into this list, like Stinkweed Imp, Golgari Grave Troll, and Life from the Loam. Everybody knows how busted this mechanic was, breaking multiple formats. For example, Stinkweed Imp does have Dredge 5. If you draw a card instead, you may put exactly 5 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. If you do, you return Stinkweed Imp from your graveyard to your hand. Then you have Golgari Grave Troll that has Dredge 6, and Life from the Loam does have Dredge 3. So these are absolutely easy ways we could just fill up the graveyard with a lot of different creatures. Instead of drawing cards, we keep dredging, and then if we put the creatures onto the battlefield, we could just sacrifice them to put them back into the graveyard. Speaking of returning stuff from the graveyard, I did want to focus on Conduit of Worlds. You may play lands from your graveyard, kind of like that Crucible of Worlds effect. You can also tap it to basically cast a non-land permanent card from your graveyard onto the battlefield, and of course you can't play spells before or even after you cast that thing. But that's completely okay. We could use that mana towards flipping Grist into that Planeswalker side if we need to. I did want to focus on some reanimation spells like Squirming Emergence and Unearth. Depending on how much cards are in your graveyard, Squirming Emergence can put something from your graveyard back onto the battlefield that's a non-land permanent, and Unearth can return like our commander from the graveyard to the battlefield for 1 mana, or it can just cycle if anything else. Other ways we could reanimate our creatures is by using Victimize, or of course Reanimate itself. Victimize, you do sacrifice a creature card. If you do, return those chosen cards from the battlefield tapped that you choose. And with Reanimate, it's the most efficient reanimation spell. For 1 black mana, put target creature card from your graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose life equal to the mana value. That's not a big downside, mainly because you're going to be losing 1 life if you're reanimating Grist herself. But now let's talk about the win cons of the deck. There's a lot of interesting ones we could take advantage of course with Grist herself, and a lot of different options too. The first one I did want to mention is Sir Conrad the Grim. This card heavily synergizes with everything we want to do in this deck. Whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into your graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent, and also you can pay mana for each player to mill a card. This could seriously stack on the damage depending on how much cards we do mill. Of course, we want to also make sure cards are going to our graveyard, leaving the graveyard because of our commander's ability. Plus, if we do have a lot of mana lying around, we could easily activate that ability multiple times for each player to mill a card, including ourselves, and potentially deal a lot of damage that way. Another card that could essentially act as a win con is Doubling Season, and the reason why I want to focus on Doubling Season is because it focuses on doubling the tokens and counters we put on our commander. If we flip into the backside of our commander, making it into a Planeswalker, we can use her ultimate right away, and we could double the amount of tokens that are entering the battlefield that are copies of creature cards in our graveyard. That's going to be pretty crazy. I mean, of course, if we're milling so much creature cards into our graveyard, use Rise of the Dark Realms to just obliterate the game, put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. This is going to be seriously one of the best win conditions you could put in the deck, because we're milling so much creature cards into our graveyard, and if we have that way of just reanimating them all, including our opponent's graveyard, onto our side of the battlefield, most likely we're going to win the next turn. I mean, the unfortunate side is if you don't have haste, you can't swing with them right away, so make sure you can protect your board after you put all the creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. However, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on the deck tech around Grist, Voracious, Larva. Again, this can be a pretty powerful commander, mainly because it is basically just 1 green mana. A lot of commanders will be like 3 or 4 mana, depending on which one you choose. So this one has an engine of itself. Flipping it into the Planeswalker side can be pretty easy, but I would love to hear down below in the comments, what are your thoughts and opinions about Grist, Voracious, Larva, and how does it really compare to the previous Grist? Which one would you rather play? Also, let me know down below in the comments, what commander do you want to see a deck tech out of? I made a lot of deck techs from a lot of different commanders in this set, but I would love to hear your thoughts to see which commander you'd like to see personally. So as always, guys, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. With that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.